The next person I'm bringing up right now, he's going to talk about all kind of international things. He is the CEO or the managing director of the Multiverse, and he's here for you right now. Let's hear it for the one, the only, Nic Easley. Yes.
There we go. They don't give me a podium to stand behind here and hide. Hopefully a little different than what you were used to there. Some of the comments from that last one will be indicative of some of the things I go over. But Nic Easley, really good to be here back in Berlin. This is the third year helping with ICBC and really starting to create a global industry of the largest consumer good in the history of the world. So really excited to share a little bit today. I'm CEO of 3C Consulting. I started that almost 13 years ago in Colorado, and also managing director of Multiverse Capital, private equity and venture capital funds. They said there's a little button here. It's got a laser on it, which will probably get me in trouble. Just see here. Perfect. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a certified financial analyst. I run venture capital private equity funds. I've also seen this industry evolve for over 13 years, from Colorado 2006, first kind of bona fide commercial medical program starting 2008, 2009, first adult use recreational state, even more legal than Amsterdam ever even wanted to be. Started working in California, multiple other states. We have operations in 24 states, have done licenses in 13 countries, worked in over 20 countries now. So really have gotten to see the US market, the global market, and from the consulting with working with clients, really have understood what works, what doesn't, where is capital powerful, and really positioning, like the last panel said, it's not about trying to be Philip Morris or Pfizer, it's being bought by them, and like how to position things for M&As versus private and public. So I've seen all sides. And also I look at markets based on the market for cannabis itself, not so much as like your country. So if I offend your ideas or your country or your policies, I apologize in advance. But I'm not guessing on what I'm going to talk about here. This is the truth from the trenches of this industry. Just a little bit of background. Originally, I'm like from farm country in Wisconsin. I was a cryptolinguist for the Air Force. I speak Spanish, a couple other languages. Unfortunately, my Dutch, Danish, Greek, and German are not very good, so thank you very much for our translators there. And from starting in Colorado, like as that first state, only 6 million people, but we learned specifically what not to do, which is more important as you're investing and navigating this landscape than knowing what to do. So not repeating the same mistakes that others have done time and time again with product recalls or building a giant indoor facility that costs, let's say, $450, $500 a square foot to build compared to big greenhouses. So we see what works, we see what doesn't, and sometimes indoor works, depending on the state or the country. So I've done this long enough to really see what's working, what's not working, what teams are really turning into good investments, and what to completely avoid. And in some of these markets, it'd be better to just put your money in a pile and burn it than invest into some of those markets. So I want to make sure you know how to not lose your money if you're going to be investing in the space. So let's just kind of like look like here at the world. I mean, we started in Colorado. I mean, this plant we inherited. It's like hundreds of thousands of years. Our species has been working with this plant. Like I didn't invent this plant, you didn't. Our great-grandparents passed this down to us, and it's our job now to create a responsible industry to like pass on to future generations. This is not a boom and bust thing. It's not like a Snuggie or some new little fun toy that people are gonna get interested in and maybe not like in the future. We've already seen in the United States over $100 billion illicit black market economy from cannabis. So people have been willing to break the law, go to jail, here, there, everywhere for this plant. And now we have this moment that this is being legalized on a medical basis around the world. Now, we have a certain amount of time to establish this industry. With some of the news I'm going to go over from this last few months, we don't have decades to do this. Like we've been doing this fast. This last 3 years, things have exploded, from the first Tinders in Germany or licenses in Denmark or what's happening in Canada. And compared to the United States, we didn't have public markets. Otherwise, we would have really scaled and taken that enormous market share that the Canadian public companies are now. But when you look at Canada, it's kind of like up north there and really cold and gray and not the best place to do agricultural production to supply the world. They had that first mover advantage and have now been trying to do acquisitions around the world. But what I see from an investment standpoint, I'm a big advocate of private investments. Most things that I like for the public markets are preparing to short them, because I know that the bubble is bigger than any bubble we've seen in the history of public markets. It's 300x over value, like a company doing $1 million in revenue that's got a market cap of like $4 billion. Like, that's ridiculous. I mean, .coms, this we're gonna get into, is like 100x. This is like 300x. So there's huge opportunities for shorting if you know what and when to do this. But when we're thinking about the world, where this is going, it's gonna go very, very fast based on a few laws that are gonna be written into law anywhere from September to March this year. So when we're thinking about these sorts of companies, if you're an investor in normal sectors, you know market risk, team risk, product risk, like the normal things you have to think about for due diligence. Now in cannabis, you have to remember this is a startup industry full of startup companies. Most startups fail because they're not bona fide businesses. Raising capital is difficult, especially if you can't go to the bank and say, hey, I need a loan to start this cannabis company. If it's federally illegal where you're trying to do this, you don't have institutional capital that's going to give you your investment. So you need private sources of capital. I mean, we've seen over $200 million US loaned out at 18.8% on real estate. Like, I pay off buildings in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like, that's not, like, normally like a mortgage is until death. So when you're thinking about making 18% on real estate, it's because banks aren't doing loans, institutions aren't doing this. So like, there's a huge opportunity here, not just for investing into the cannabis companies touching the plant, cultivation, processing, distribution, dispensaries, extraction, manufacturing, but the ancillary side of this industry as well. Like, real estate is stable. I mean, other than 2008, 2009, of course, kind of kicked off some bad things there from the US. So when I'm looking at these sorts of markets and like, what do I need to do for due diligence when I'm managing like my personal capital, my investors' capital, my number one rule is like, don't lose my investors' money. Like, my second rule is like, see rule number one. So I can't be risky and just throw it all out there. But there's a lot of risk in this space, and there's always risk in startup industries, but the opportunity of getting large private positions on the cap table, like with board control and seeing these companies scale, that's where there's the biggest impact for private capital now, where you can actually get in for like, let's say $500,000 and get 10% of a company, 20% of a company. That starts to scale. These things, like, we literally grow money on trees. Like, that's what our business does. So when you're making a cash flow business and you're investing into that, the proceeds, the dividends, the distributions are enormous if you have the right tax structures. But a lot of these companies, I'll see a New York entity or some crazy company that's doing the investment in some international project. So the other risk you have to look at is like, where is your money coming from? Where is it going through, like a Holland BV? Is it going through Luxembourg? Like, and then where is that capital coming back to? So you have to think about the long-term exit strategy. All of our funds are like 6, 8, 10-year exits where we just reinvest, huge exits come. So if you're not preparing for like capital gains taxes or how you're gonna get all of that capital back and not lose 40, 50, 60% of it, even if the opportunity is a great investment, you're gonna lose so much money in the future if you don't plan for these things now. Those are the risks that, as you're looking at these opportunities, it's more than just can they grow good weed or not. That's the easy part. This is agriculture. But the normal risks are much more difficult in cannabis because you've got all this Canadian public news and all this distraction, so it's really hard to see like what's true, what's not, what's good sources of information. That's where being deep in the industry, being under the hood of hundreds of different companies and knowing what's happening, we can see this is good, this is not. And for investors to go into this on their own, very, very, very challenging, especially into the public market, because 90% of what you read is not true. So kind of in this slide, thinking about like that .com bubble, so many of these startup companies are going to fail. And when you're looking for a unicorn, like that magical investment that's going to have hundreds of X, or when you can buy Amazon shares for $2 a share, that's when you want to be getting in and playing with these things. It's not like when they're trading at $1,500 a share. And that's what we try to position for. And that's why you only have this moment once. And there's so much risk in this industry that if you can know where to put in early, this is not going away. It's only a matter of time until like larger legalization happens. Medically is so important to focus on internationally. Recreational is violating international laws. So always know if you're investing into recreational cannabis, be it in Uruguay, be it in Canada, be it future Mexico recreational, your country and company is violating international law. Now in the US, I'll violate federal law, no problem. I'll follow state law, but never violate international law because you will lose your market share and ability to export, which we'll talk about shortly. So one of the things that we notice internationally, the same problem here in Germany, as we'll get into, is that without demand, and legal demand, you don't have a market. Like we're creating patients, and this is a patient-focused market. But patients come from doctors writing prescriptions. Patients are then your clients. Clients are your revenue, and revenue is your business, and without patients, you have nothing. So there's this huge component now that we need much more doctor education, clinical research, clinical trials, because so many doctors, even here in Germany, they're not stoked on writing a prescription for someone to go home and smoke a plant. Like everything from their medical practices said, like smoking's bad, you shouldn't do that. So to try to get doctors to understand what are the efficacies with cannabis, how to use this properly. And a doctor, people think about brands, like brands are so important. For normal industries, yes, but in cannabis, it's an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient. So when a doctor writes a prescription, they go into that database, they look at that, they put in cannabis. If they didn't write a specific brand like Viagra or some specific product, they're gonna get the generic. And in these countries like Germany, where they're actually paying for standardized healthcare, the highest quality standard at the lowest price is the generic for the country. We learned that in the first round of the German tender process. It's not about brands, it's about the highest quality standards at the lowest price of production. But if we don't create the demand, which there's demand from the consumers and the patients, but legal access and the gatekeepers are the doctors. So if you're in a country or if you're in a program, you have to work towards doctor education as part of your investment thesis. Otherwise, you're not gonna have clients to actually fund that business. So, I think about planning and when to enter a market, what's important for a business, the team, the market, the product, what's unique, is it protected, is it differentiated? Do these people, for me, it's not important for a project or for an investment if they even know anything about cannabis at all. This is an agricultural commodity, this is manufacturing, pharmaceutical processing, and this is retail or distribution. So if you think about that first, it's not that special. It's an amazing medicinal plant, but it's still a plant, and agriculture has been around for 10,000 years. So any of these new big gimmicks you might invest into from cultivation companies or fertilizer companies that are gonna quadruple your yields, you gotta look into that, because traditional agriculture, we weren't growing corn in warehouses. It just doesn't make sense. So trying to have a 6-hectare indoor facility that's GMP, that's great, but your cost of production is gonna be so high, your competitive advantage is gone. So the only time planning or a big indoor works is if it's part of a vertical market or for research and development, but really 4-season hybrid GMP greenhouses are the best. And you can ride in and catch a big wave, a big investment, but if there's people around you that knock it off, or if all of a sudden your program no longer can do what you think you're gonna do, your business is done. So the planning is more important for these teams. So if you're looking at an investment, look at the team. Do they know what they're doing from outside industry? Do they come from finance, from manufacturing, from processing? Is there anything unique there at all, or are they just master growers? Because master growers are not master business people, and our joke in the US is they're master fuck-ups. But it's more because they're the biggest problem with all of our industry, because they started a cultivation knowing what they did in their basement or their closet, and then they're trying to do that on a commercial scale and they have no idea. So look for people with agricultural experience or pharmaceutical experience, not just people that know how to make good hash. That's the easy part. So a couple of the things that really, for my investment thesis internationally, for our private equity and venture capital, you gotta know the rules to play the game. And everyone's just looking at this industry and it's so exciting, but they don't know what rules govern them. You always have to know what you have to serve. So the WHO and the reclassification, this is enormous. Some of these things that's happened the last 3 to 6 months have changed the entire international landscape of what's legal, what's not, where to produce, and where to avoid. Even though there's some countries we'll get into with Cyprus and Malta and Greece and countries in Central and South America, or your amazing tie-in with the Zimbabwe president or something, Just because it sounds unique, if it's not following some of these laws, it's not going to happen. You're going to lose your money, and you're going to think of how great it would have been, and then you're going to regret. And that's the one thing with this time delta. You only have so much time to get your money into the markets and private markets, because public, everyone's going to trade in the future. Once this is institutionalized, Amazon's $1,500 a share. You're just trading like everyone else or shorting the Hong Kong dollar. The companies that won't come in now, that's where there's the opportunity now to get your capital in. And every day, like I don't have investors' capital, their money is less valuable to me because that time is so important, especially with some of these single conventions. Like the single convention of 1961 is your Bible currently if you're in global cannabis. Essentially with the CND coming out as well of like pushing for like the rescheduling, we were hoping they were going to vote on this. Like we were with the UN in the end of the year in Vienna. We were hoping this was going to come through like for the rescheduling and like pretty much requiring that countries of the single convention would be providing these products. That's 168 different countries that once this vote goes through and is enacted, must provide those products to patients in their country. So I don't care if they want to legalize cannabis or not or produce it or not, they have to provide insulin to people with diabetes. That's pretty much like what some of this would mean. So that's why we have like 3 to 12 months to really position companies to be global producers, not Canada, not just Israel, not just Holland, not just Denmark, but the highest quality, lowest cost of production countries that are legal currently or enacting laws. The ones that are going to wait 2-3 years, by that time, it's too late for what we're doing internationally. The INCB, like International Narcotics Control Board, like that's when we start thinking about like Interpol and like adult things, like don't violate international law. It's really, really bad for business and really bad for your freedom if you want to stay a free person. Their report about 2-3 weeks ago, the 2018 report, was pretty much who's on the naughty list, who's on the nice list, like kind of like a Santa Claus, and which programs are bona fide and real, and which programs are illegal and violating international law. And just because there's a country that makes a program, if it's not compliant with the international law, they won't be able to export their products. Some of the problems that many Colombians are going to face, many Israelis are going to face. So many of these countries are producing under the local requirements of that program, but not knowing how they have to be compliant internationally. And for me, for where I invest, I always think, how do I produce at the highest standards of the country I have to produce at, but what's the hardest country in the world to import to? And I want to produce at their standards. So Canada started with GPP. They didn't even know what GMP was at first. And with the European Union, European GMP is kind of important. You can't just say you're certified and processed. But when the INCB is coming out and sending warning letters to countries saying, you're breaking the law, like that's kind of a big deal. It's like a warning letter of like, we're going to raid you, we're going to shut this down. If you invest into one of those countries and that happens, your investment's done. Market risk, your market just went away. You were making tires and tires are now illegal. Like that's the position you do not want to be with one of your investments. So let's think about like hemp here, because there's cannabis, there's hemp, everyone's kind of confused, what's the differentiation? They're all dogs, and like the joke is like, cannabis is like a poodle and hemp is like a Great Dane. They're both dogs. They're both from wolves, and humans, through us breeding them, like Gregor Mendel, like with pea pods back here in Germany a long time ago, that's how we made different types of cannabis. But cannabis sativa, it's the same species. And the biological definition of a species is the ability to make sexually viable offspring. So I could take the biggest hemp plant with the smallest, highest THC cannabis plant, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But like, don't take a bulldog and mix it with a Shih Tzu and get some bullshit is kind of like the example there. But that 0.3%, 0.4% for THC is really what's the difference between hemp and cannabis. And hemp and CBD, huge opportunities in it, especially in Europe. But in the United States and many of these countries, it's completely illegal. CBD in the United States is the same scheduling as heroin. So like people are like, it's legal in 50 states. It's like pretty much like heroin or narcotics, like the same Schedule 1. So if you get into that, also know the rules to play that game, because if it's not legal, you can't do it. But like with Austria, with Switzerland, with some of these hemp programs coming, amazing novel foods opportunities for CBD companies. But if it's just a CBD company and doesn't have novel foods, doesn't have some of those registrations, it's not going to take international market share, and Rite Aid or Walgreens or big pharmaceutical companies are not going to buy your products like you might think for your revenue. In the United States, we had the Farm Bill in 2014, which started the legalization of cannabis, like for hemp. The 2018 Farm Bill started and really made things legal. But the United States will not be global hemp producers, at least as of now. We don't have the infrastructure, research and development, the genetics. Like, we're doing so much breeding, we're getting better and better. You look at Charlotte's Web, like Stanley Brothers, 21 million last quarter. Like, that's coming up. And that was just from a small company in Colorado where we were one of the first big hemp producers. But when you're thinking about the FDA, Epidex, Sativex, GW Pharmaceutical, that company was approved by the FDA as a cannabinoid and really set a precedent for CBD from a pharmaceutical standpoint. So we have to, anytime you hear CBD, it's kind of like a buzzword. It's a snake oil industry right now that 95% of the products don't even have it in it, which is like selling bottles of like a few ounces for $300 to someone with cancer, saying it's going to cure their cancer, but it's like hemp seed oil. So you have to be very careful when you're investing in CBD to know it's legal and it's real, because there's so many CBD products, cat food products, like water products, CBD shampoo, like all sounds great. Yeah, the veterinary side, the cosmetic side, it sounds great, but it's got to be legal and it's got to be real. And if it's not, you have to be able to avoid it. This is kind of like my favorite metaphor I always kind of mention. I just remember the late nights as a kid playing this little game, Risk. You may have seen it here. It's like world domination. Maybe not the best kind of example to mention in Germany here or in the United States. It's horrible. But you got one shot. Like, we just opened up the box. The board's down, all your homies, you're all sitting around the game. And it's like, where are you going to put your pieces? Like, where are you going to put your investments? I don't have hundreds of billions. I can just take over everything right now. With $1 billion of additional capital, I'd probably own 20+% of the sector for life now. If Constellation had given that to us, we would have pretty much been the only private thing in the world. But, long term. So you're choosing where to put these pieces. Where are you going to double down? Where are you going to go to war and like fight for that territory, for that country, for that company? Because it's only happening once. And if you come in with like one little person on a country and you keep putting more there, if you're in the wrong country, you lose everything. So some sectors are good and some are bad. So that's going to kind of transition into like talking about which countries and markets now I really think are the most important. So EU is awesome. I love the European Union. Some of the countries here in Europe that are not a part of the European Union trying to get into this program are going to have major problems. Just because I mentioned this morning, like just because you're producing in Macedonia and sell it illegally to someone in Poland in the EU who then can sell it to Germany doesn't mean it's legal. So just because you can do something doesn't mean it's legal and that you should do it. And just because others are doing something also doesn't mean that you should be doing it. Sometimes they're going towards a cliff and you're just hooking right onto them. And then you're going to get involved. And litigation is on the skyrocketing up and up. So you have to be able to protect yourself. But when we're thinking about the EU, it's huge here, but it's going to be much slower than people think because things go through process. Apparently you like papers here. In the United States, I could do digital and get a driver's license. Here it's like paperwork, paperwork, paperwork. The bee farm, so much slower, but it's so big here if you position yourselves correctly. With one of the pieces with monitoring of like these drug programs, they're starting the precedent that what I see Germany and European Union countries doing will essentially emulate across the globe. Many countries are going to be watching these countries and here to see what they're allowing because you've been doing things so much longer from a regulated basis and copying those. It's not going to be Chinese hemp companies selling CBD to like European countries. It's like I really see like a European economy here, but also knowing that with the EU, like Germany couldn't say, hey, we're not going to allow imports from Portugal or from somewhere else in the EU. It's like if it meets those quality standards, you've got that free trade here, which is really an interesting opportunity if you know which laws you're following. So when you're scheduling and registering drug products, ACMs, APIs, once you're registering in one country and re-registering that in other countries and part of an API database, you're essentially the Pfizer for cannabis already, even as private companies early on. So in reclassifying CBD, this is also like very important. I mentioned novel foods before. If you don't have novel foods or understand what that is and you want to be a global CBD player, you're wrong. And your company's not going to be able to sell the products that you think. And that's going to be very expensive. You're going to need contract manufacturers. It's a much more lengthy process than growing some weeds, sucking some oils out of them, putting them in a pretty bottle in a pretty box, and then just selling it online. People are doing that. Doesn't mean it's legal. But novelty foods is something that if you're making edibles, products, oils, manufactured nasal sprays, sublinguals, pills, anything from CBD, it must be under those programs for the future. So forward-thinking compliance. Don't just be compliant now. What's the forward regulations you're going to have to be compliant with an investment? Otherwise, you're doing it, you're investing, you're starting all these jobs, and then you can't sell anything. And that's not a good business model. Germany, I love it. Like the first Tinder process, like having a qualification there, those first 10, having those taken away. The only value that came to me from all of that struggle in Germany years ago was learning all they care about is quality and the lowest price. That's it. Like I have the ability of saving governments billions of dollars by producing in low-cost countries at the highest standards they require and importing to those markets. Not every country needs to grow pineapples in warehouses to have pineapples. Like we grow strawberries in some places, we ship them other places. We grow blueberries, we grow flowers in Colombia, which is indicative of like flowers grow there well, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if their standards are not correct that they're going to be able to send to those markets. So when you're thinking about what Germany wants, GACP, GAP, GMP, perfect. That means if I'm in Colombia, I'd better be doing those. If I'm in Canada, I'd better be doing those because that fake GPP will no longer work in the future. This is the problem though. Here we've got 80+ million people in Germany, but the doctors are not making prescriptions like we would like them to because you've had to try everything and then you can try cannabis. What I love are programs that say anything your doctor thinks cannabis can help you with, you can then make a prescription for. Not like you've tried every single other drug product and now everything's failing and this person's dying. Okay, let's try cannabis. That's really, really hard to make a program, but not even 100 million. And Germany's really been hard because people set it as that benchmark internationally of the market they want. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on trying to win these Tinders or the second round Tinder. But you'll notice I didn't apply for one of the last Tinders. And I mean, we got 2 of the first Danish licenses. We've gotten licenses all over the country. I don't even want that here. I just want import and distribution. That's it. Because I know that the cost of production here is going to be so much higher than anywhere else in the EU down farther south. Your regulations, your tax, your compliance, your VAT. It's just like, hey, let's start some hemp companies or CBD companies or cannabis companies in France. You'd be like, it's gonna be very, very expensive to operate, but if we can just grow it somewhere else at those standards and import it, that's what I wanna be doing. You know, so it's been years, it's been happening. These are the main challenges, the doctor education, the right perception of cannabis, but even though it's slow right now, just think about what you're doing now indicative for 5 years, for 10 years. That's the timeline I look at. Like every dollar I put in, I don't care about it for 5, 10 years, but I'm just hoping that that's gonna turn into $100 or $200 or $300. The longer you keep your money in these markets, the better it will do for you. Now, if it's public companies, you're just giving it to a bunch of yahoos to reinvest, buy things, and sell things based on what they're speculating they can do. And sometimes they can, but a lot of them, they knew capital and how to manipulate public markets. They did not know cannabis. And that's why you see Canopy and Tilray and Aurora making all of these major acquisitions and sometimes garbage. Like, I'm like, you spent $330 million on that? I'm like, shit. I think it'd be a little bit smarter if you're a multi-billion-dollar company, but startup industries, startup public companies. So Canada, I'm from northern Wisconsin as a kid. Canada, I appreciate what they did in starting the first federal kind of medical program like that. I mean, other than Uruguay, and recreational. All adults should have access to cannabis if they want it or not. Like, just like alcohol or something else. We're seeing alcohol sales have gone down 13% in legal states and countries, like where this access is. But Canada, unfortunately, like, they knew there's only 40 million people here. They have a very robust illicit market. And they started doing acquisitions all over the world and into the United States. The problem, though, with Canada is that you've got all of these startup companies listing on public markets that have nothing there. Reverse splits, reverse mergers, all of this garbage. And they're acting like they own the world, but then many of those companies are illegal in their filings or in their processes, or they're investing into US. And anytime you have a multinational or a foreign national investing into something that's federally illegal, that's not good. That'd be like, hey, let's take some money from Germany and go down to like Uzbekistan and start a giant heroin operation. Like, that's gonna work out really good. Like, not the best, but they've been getting away with it. But as soon as the CSE and the TSX start delisting some of these stocks, if you invested into them, your money's not in a good place. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing. ETFs are good for like giving capital, like private funds and ETFs, like to get your money in and have people who know the market to put it in. But the problem even with like some of those exchanges is that if you're investing into good companies, they're tied in with the bad companies. So then as soon as that market starts to shift or the bubble bursts, even your good companies are going to be going down as well. That's why private investments, long-term investments, are the best places for your capital currently. I kind of like this, like once Tilray listed there publicly, like I like them bringing access to the world, but it's like Silicon Valley right now. And just because everyone's talking about these companies doesn't mean that what they're doing is right. The amount of companies I see trying to piggyback and copy these companies over and over again, it's not the goal to try to be them. What are they missing? What are they not doing? And what are they doing wrong? And how do you hedge your bets to position for when they fail, like your upside comes? Like our hedge fund in Macau should be launched and live by like the third quarter this year. All we're going to be doing is just watching their markets and knowing when to short. But I also know that like 90% of those press releases you see are pure garbage, pure lies, but no one knows it. And then it's hard to find access to information. But I do appreciate any company that's trying to bring medical cannabis to suffering patients, but not just at their detriment or for their profit. People, planet, profit. Like that's true profit, not just trying to sell somebody a drug that's going to keep them alive for longer but cost them $600 a day like some of these other medications we see. But long-term pharma will take this, but medical and recreational cannabis as we know it is one thing. Pharma is very different, and that's like Epidex, Sativex, that's where we're going. You have to look at both sectors and be in both. But this is the problem. You cannot take money from Canada, invest into things that are illegal federally in the United States, or kind of like the B-Farm's been talking, or a few other countries. If you have a license and you're a public company or a private company and you're profiting from recreational cannabis and medical cannabis, no longer being able to send medical cannabis to medical countries. So what would that do to Tilray's stock price, to Canopy's stock price, to Aurora's stock price if they no longer can be importing to all these other countries? And then everyone's growing a fuck ton of marijuana in Canada that now they can't sell anywhere else. And the price is already, like there's almost 1,000 pending licenses. They're growing so much cannabis in Canada and keep lying, saying they have all these shortages to keep getting more investment into it. But once that is all getting established and there's so much cannabis, legal, medical, and recreational, and 80+% of them can't send it to the rest of the world, it's just gonna be like an ocean of water and they just keep filling it with water. So like the prices are going to plummet, those companies are going to like tank, many of them go out of business, and I hope with our private equity to come in and buy many of those distressed assets and spread them around the world. But you're gonna see the greatest stock market crashes bigger than anything you've ever seen from Wall Street or any past big bubble crashes in Canada, and it's gonna be so detrimental for their entire economy. But a couple of those big assholes are gonna still be billionaires and happy from having manipulated the markets. So be very careful with some of those companies. I won 2 of the first 11 licenses in Denmark. We sold 1, still have another. I don't care about growing in Denmark. It's cold as shit there. They work 32 hours a week. Other than like 1 month in the summer, like, I don't know, man. Like, so Denmark, the cost of production's high. Everyone also thinks it's this huge program. It's a pilot research program. Like the government a couple of weeks ago is like the Danish Medicines Agency, where's all these research plans we were supposed to see? You're all just Canadians bringing hundreds of millions of dollars to build greenhouses here. But like, it's a pilot research program. Yeah, they've got the highest cancer rate per capita. Yeah, cannabis is gonna be great for them, but it's not the country to take over the world with. It was just the second country other than Canada that was going to allow international export. That's why we went there. But I'm not there. I haven't put an additional dollar in. I just made $5 million selling a piece of paper. It's like, so you have to know which markets and when, but like where to double down once you get a license. Greece, Macedonia, Cyprus. Macedonia actually has a very decent program that just needs to be changed a little bit and could be very advantageous for the world and for some other countries. But when you look at some of these, like Cyprus, Malta, like that's where you do money laundering. It's not where you grow cannabis. Or wait, they closed that down in like 2009, 2012. Those are not the countries that are going to take over the world for production. There's some advantages there and there's some patients there that need cannabis. But just because there's someone who wants a pineapple somewhere doesn't mean I need to start a pineapple plantation. So when I look at these countries, especially with Greece, there's opportunity there. Tikkun Olam and a few got some of those first licenses, really exciting, but some of the laws they copied from Israel could make their program very, very challenging to do business in the future. And it's Greece, but it's a member of the EU, so it could be a player if it doesn't turn out to be corrupt or have some of those problems. You know, Spain, we were there for ICBC a couple weeks ago. Spain, kind of a shit show of a program as well. Unfortunately, it's like similar to like tolerated coffee house kind of clubs, but they're still years away from a bona fide program. Now, there's a lot of capital in Spain that wants to get into the market, but it's not about the domestic market in Spain. but long term, like they know cannabis there, but their program has so many problems, just like the Netherlands. Like they're gonna give 20 coffee house licenses to start actually growing cannabis and not like importing hash in your butt to sell in a coffee house there, like the current program. It's like tolerated, but it's not like legal. They're gonna legalize that, and it's gonna be probably $1 billion, $2 billion market there. But Spain, it's gonna be a little bit slower. You know, Portugal is one of the countries a lot of people are talking about, and Tilray's making a lot of weird claims right now about all of their amazing GMP greenhouses, which if you've seen them roll up plastic signs does not mean GMP. And if you don't know what GMP is and you're international, you'd better research it. Like for how you trim, dry, process, cure, package, manufacture. It's not just saying you're GMP. Like it's great to be like, we're GMP, GACP. Like you have to know what those things are, and it's not cannabis that's certified GMP. It's your processes, your facilities. So in many countries, we've just been buying GMP facilities from other industries, repurposing those to easily get our certifications. That's how I've beaten some of these public companies by 9 to 12 months in some of these markets. So just remember, like Portugal, you know, there are 2 licenses. There was a 3rd issued a couple weeks ago for some outdoor production. Just because Aurora says that they're going to be buying some country in the Azores that's going to produce 1 ton a year that they're applying for. They don't have a license. And to see their stock price, what that's done, Portugal will be like the lowest cost, highest quality production, but it's so challenging to get in that most people don't understand like what's going on there or how it's going to work. But for their population, I really think that Portugal, based on any EU countries, has the best local program because they didn't legalize cannabis. They decriminalized other drugs and legalized medical cannabis. So just remember, like I said, internationally, if you're in this game, it's only about medical because the second you do recreational, no longer valid in the international space. Israel's been big. I know Canatech is going on right now. Everyone should be at ICBC because it's way, way better for what's happening. But Israel was kind of stuck in this horrible place for a good amount of years. So much research, so much development, so much patient focus. I love Israel for doing that, but now with them being able to export by the end of the year, they think they're now going to be world leaders. So what's that going to mean? A bunch of shitty public companies are going to list there with all this speculation that are going to do nothing. Be careful about that. Also be careful about German exchange. Now that cannabis is legalizing here, all these startups are going to try to list publicly to do the same shit that they did in Canada, to make these high market cap companies get tons of investment and redeploy that in other sectors. But that is not how you start public companies. Like you start public companies by being a private company and scaling, showing revenue, showing real processes, and then listing. Facebook didn't go public day one. I mean, any of these big companies, it's about position. So when we make investments, it's about having lots of pieces to make M&As, mergers and acquisitions, that then can pre-IPO and go public. Those will be huge titans of industry, not little startup 2-cent shares. Maybe a 2-cent share company makes it to Amazon, but most likely not. And if you find those ones, let us know who they are. But you're going to see a lot of companies list in Israel. The only thing I really, really care about in Israel is like research and development, clinical trials, drug discovery. Like I've got about a 25 million euro play where I'm like drug discovery plays in Israel, but I'm not producing, like the cost of production there will be so high that I think long term it's going to be challenging to do real massive production there. Latin America's got a lot of talking right now. Everyone's really interested in Latin America. Colombia by far has been the country most people have been discussing. But we know that when it comes to some products, it's not about producing there and shipping to other countries. But like there's a lot of patients that need medicine there, but with Mexico and Colombia, with all this talk compared to what's actually real, it's not as real as most people would think. So we're thinking on a lot of those markets on like starting them, but not doubling down for world production. You know, Colombia specifically, amazing for flower exports. With all the licenses though, many companies got the license for analytical testing, which then it didn't work really well for Volkswagen, like testing their own cars and saying that they were good, if you guys remember. Sorry, Germany. It's the same thing in Colombia. A lot of companies got that license. It's fine to do in-house testing, but don't do your own certifying authority. You're voided from UN compacts. Like if you do that, it's a conflict of interest. What I really care about are the non-psychoactive licenses for mass outdoor production, for bulk oils, and then shipping to other countries. The psychoactivity side, like the EU's already said, like if it's not from indoor or greenhouse or GMP for the oils, those things can't be imported. So 90% of the Colombian investment plays and strategies are not going to work. And the Canadians ruined Colombia a little bit by bringing most of their indoor varieties down to Colombia to grow outside that were doing great in warehouses in Canada. Colombia is a little different to grow plants outside. So I do think Colombia is going to be major for a few companies that do it right, but there's so much speculation there that I haven't made major investments there as of now. Africa's kind of unfortunately been a shit show. Sorry for the language. South Africa had the best program moving forward. Their government went on strike. SAPRA, the medicines agency there, just got out of strike. There's 21 licenses that were applied for. One was disqualified, and they now have a moratorium against new license applications. Clinical research in South Africa will be incredible, especially with the AIDS rate and what we'll be able to see with clinical trials there with cannabis and with AIDS research. Lesotho also has like a bona fide program. The Canadians also destroyed that by coming and doing lots of plays, but Swaziland, Zimbabwe issued those 37 licenses. If anyone's been to Zimbabwe and knows that program, it's not also going to be a world leader. It sounds good on a press release, but when it gets to boots on the ground, it's not a real program. But I think South Africa will be the most bona fide program within 12 to 18 months in South Africa, which I already have applied for a license there as well. Asia's been challenging. Like you had the first hemp licenses in India, like Bang, like the source, getting to where cannabis is from in this area. Unfortunately, all I see from like Philippines, from Thailand, from South Korea, it's all about import. I mean, right now, Vanuatu and some of these other countries want to have these programs, but they're just not creating the programs in a way that's compliant internationally. So when I look at these markets, I think import markets, highest standards, lowest cost, getting medicine to the people who need it, but I still have yet to see a major bona fide investment strategy here. And Australia has had such a challenging program as well that they've been around for a while in a huge hemp industry, but they also, other than partnering with a few Canadians or Israelis, haven't through their program laws, really been able to take huge international market share as of now. And remember from that risk game, like Australia's only 2 troops every time. So it's like, you could put all your resources there, but you're gonna get stuck in that little corner. And then it's hard to get back out if you guys remember that game. So, I'm almost done here, but just thinking of like, we've been talking about this and doing this for over a decade. And there's all these new people or people that are observing this and thinking, maybe I'll get in now, or maybe I'll invest a little bit into like some public companies to try to get your feet wet. But when you're trying to like navigate this risk and understand what's happening, you have to choose like where you're going to put your capital and when, because time is the one thing that we don't have more of. And like opportunity cost, you put your time, your capital into a market, it doesn't go anywhere, you get distracted. Not every investment works. Not every country works. Not every program works. And I've even seen great companies not scale into unicorns because of some internal things or things outside of their control. So diversify your strategies, be in multiple places, and know how, if you're investing into one company, what services, what products, what things do they need, and how do you invest in a way to create like circular value versus just like, oh, this sounds good, I'm gonna put money into it. If it's not legal, if it's not real, you're not gonna make anything from it, but we have to do everything making medicine for like our sick grandparents. So like if it's not a good company that thinks about patients first, safe, affordable medicine, an alternative to pharmaceutical like drugs, it's not a good investment because money is one thing, but like what do you do with money? It's like bullets in a gun. You could have warehouses full of bullets, but if it's not on the battlefield at the right time, it doesn't matter. And that's where we like help investors to get their bullets like onto the battlefield to make impact and profit and get medicine to patients who need it, which is the reason we're all in this room today. And always have to remember, what you do matters. We're creating an industry to give to future generations. So if you're not comfortable with the products your investments are making, if your sick grandma couldn't have those products, don't do it, because this is more of a responsibility of investment and what we do than just a big money opportunity. But there's enough money for everyone to make. This will be larger than tobacco, alcohol. We're gonna take major market share from pharmaceuticals, and you wanna get into this now. In 5 years, your capital will be like a cent, 1 euro cent compared to like a 500 euro note for what it could have done for you. Perfect. Any time for Q? Later. Perfect. Thanks everyone very much for letting me share.
Nic Easley. That was so informative. Thank you very much. The man knows his potatoes. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions. We're running a little late. I'm trying to speed everything up a little bit. Don't